Welcome to the Albany Book Festival online, presented by the New York State Writers Institute at the University at Albany. You can learn more about the festival and find direct links to independent booksellers at our festival webpage, albanybookfestival.com. Follow us on social media and hear from more videos from the Writers Institute.
Hi, my name is Mike Huber with the New York State Writers Institute. I'm happy to be here virtually with two wonderful writers whose recent books take place in a time at least a century apart, and yet are underpinned on a most American of subjects, baseball. Gish Jen's fifth novel is The Resistors, described in one review as a look at a society even more catastrophically divided than our own. Jane Levy's previous books include The Last Boy, Mickey Mantle and the End of America's Childhood, and Sandy Koufax, A Lefty's Legacy. Her new book is even mightier. It's titled The Big Fella, Babe Ruth and the World He Created. Gish and Jane, welcome.
Hi. Hey, good to see you.
Good to see you. So you two are familiar, you know each other, you've done interviews before, you're friends, friendly.
We're actually sisters.
Separated at birth.
Separated at birth. Yes.
So why don't you two take it from here, and we will cut in at the end and say our closing remarks. But we look forward to hearing this conversation.
May I say something to introduce the woman who I adore more than anybody else in the world, virtually or otherwise, Gish? When I was presented very early on with a galley, maybe it was even manuscript of The Resistors, I knew that it would be the success that it is and that it would touch as many people as it does, baseball lovers and not baseball lovers, because it's, I've heard you say, a dystopian feminist baseball novel written by somebody who didn't really know a lot of baseball and therefore was taking a huge risk in writing it. But it captures in a dystopian, horrible world that's looking more and more like ours, that baseball was the one thing that in that society, perverted as it is, that the world hung on to. It was the essence of our humanity. And right then I knew, I love it, it's perfect, go for it.
Thank you so much, Jane. And of course, you can only imagine, we were going to talk about risk-taking today. And I mean, you can only imagine, there I am. I am a writer. This is my, eighth book. So, and every book is a risk, but this book is a particular risk, of course, because I was known as someone who wrote about America and identity. And especially American identity through an immigrant lens. And nobody had ever associated me with the word baseball before, although it is in my very first book, where the Chang family gets up and roots for the Chankees, as they call them, Yankee Stadium. So, it's there in the back of my mind, but I never, ever even imagined I would ever write anything, with a stadium in it or a baseball or anything like that. But I think that, it's so interesting because you and I have both taken risks. So this was like a huge risk for me to be writing about America yet again, but in this way, this very, very, very different way. And I think we talked a little bit before about kind of, what we were most terrified of as we took our big risks. And of course, we've taken very interestingly, a kind of the opposite risk. You're somebody very, very, very comfortable talking about baseball, who branched out in a major and, for you, scary way in the Babe Ruth book to talk about American society. So it's so interesting that we sort of met right in the middle. So I'm writing about America and I kind of inch over to baseball, and you're writing about baseball and you kind of inch over. I think that, when I think about what terrified me, and of course we're all terrified when you take these kind of risks. I'm terrified that somebody, whose work I really respect on the subject of baseball will read my book and think, you gotta be kidding, right? And who was that person for me? It was you, Jane Levy. I think the Jane and somebody sort of, let's send this to Jane Levy. I just went, oh my God. Oh my God. And I will say that, I have never been a happier puppy or a more relieved puppy than I was when I got your email. And you actually, you did not take it apart from beginning to end. And I haven't got to know you, by the way, since then. I know that you are not always so kind about every baseball novel that crosses your desk. We're not going to talk about
No, you brought it up, not me.
How much you didn't like them, because I felt for those writers as if they were me, I'm like, oh, thank God I wasn't. Oh my God, thank God. Also, I wasn't so and so.
Was there more than one?
I was terrified of you. What? I was terrified of you. Are you kidding? Oh my God. I mean, nobody knows baseball backward, forward, upside down, backwards. And there I was. I, of course, had studied up. I knew a little bit from my background. I did know a little bit from my childhood and so on, and my, some sort of experiences. But fundamentally, I was not a baseball writer. And so therefore, to get your blessing just meant so much to me. But Jane, I want you to talk a little bit about what it was like. That there you are, the ultimate baseball biographer, and you've done Mantle, and you've done Sandy Koufax, you've done all the big ones. And here you are now with Babe Ruth. And instead of going and telling kind of what everybody would expect you to do, which is a kind of a your basic authoritative baseball biography, you decide to frame it in a very different way that has so much more to do with society and America, my favorite subject, than with baseball exactly. I mean, it does have to do with baseball, of course, because baseball is the American game, as we both agree. And of course, all of America would be in him. And of course, a changing America would be embodied in Babe Ruth. But do you want to talk about kind of what, you realize that, but you want to talk about what it meant when you realized that, that was the book that you had to write, which is sort of the book people wanted you to write, but not really? You want to talk about when you realize that?
I don't write traditional biographies. None of the three is a classic baseball. He did this and then he did that and he scored and he had a home run and then he went to third, and that doesn't really interest me. The reason I wrote about Koufax, Mantle, and Ruth is because they're figures that transcend the game. So Sandy, and the three of them actually fit together in a completely unplanned way. They're really all three books about celebrity culture and the place that sports, and particularly baseball, has come to fill. So Sandy was the guy who eschewed celebrity. He was the guy who didn't want to be defined by page 6 in the New York Post. And because he was discriminating and had some sense of personal propriety, people decided he must be a misanthrope, which is not true. He would say to me very plaintively, all my friends don't think I'm a misanthrope. And Mantle is the guy, more than anybody else, who you can say was destroyed by celebrity. Every round of drinks that was bought for him in New York, every setup was a setup for his alcoholism, which was undiagnosed and untreated, coming out of Oklahoma in the 30s. And Babe was the guy who created celebrity. He really was created with his agent, who was the first sports agent, a template for how to be famous and how to exploit that fame in America. So having set out to, do these larger issues, in each book it got more and more complicated. And Babe, of course, he's dead, unlike the other two guys. And I realized very quickly that I was going to have to do something that I had no training in, which is I was going to have to be an historian. And I was going to have to find my material in archives and in databases. And I had to self-learn how to do that. And my terror was that some real historian was going to review this and say, what the hell does she know about the 1920s in America? What does she know about the beginnings of photography that could caption action on a field, and, different typefaces that could fit more words in a telegram. And that was my terror. And that's why it took 8 years to write, because come hell or high water, I was going to nail down every detail. And if I couldn't find something new about him, I wouldn't have done it. There was no point in redoing the kind of book you were suggesting. That's been done to death about Babe. So I read everything that had been written, and I noticed, shockingly, that the first 20 years of his life were missing from every biography. And so I thought, if I can find out why they're missing, if I can fill in that gap. I mean, you couldn't write a biography of Churchill, for example, and not touch on the first 20 years of his life. But in sports, you could do that because the standards were always so different. So I did not sign the contract until I found something that nobody had known before, which is the nature of his childhood and his parents' marriage, which was a nightmare, which is something you didn't talk about when Babe Ruth was a boy or when Babe Ruth was Babe Ruth.
Yeah, so so the question is, taking a risk like this, I think that there's a lot of, this is the Writers Institute, people are interested in writing. The question is, what keeps you going, right? So I mean, my first question is, was there somebody that you were terrified of, the way I was terrified of you? Was there a historian of the 20s where you thought like, oh my God, is
yeah, and
so-
I co-opted them. That's what you do. You go and you call them first, and you say, "Hey, you need help." Ann Douglas at Columbia.
Interesting.
She's the go-to girl. And
did she like your book?
I don't have any idea.
Oh, interesting.
And by the way, Sandy Koufax did not read the book about him. And I knew that I got it right because he didn't read it. He was the kind of guy who wanted to read 259 pages about himself. Then he wasn't the guy I described in them.
Yeah, so the question is, when we take these risks, first the question is, what enables us to do it, and I think what drives us to do it, right? So, I mean, I think that if I think about how I was able to kind of just wade ahead, just as you were saying, if I had any inkling that anybody had ever written a book like this before, then I would have backed off immediately. Do you know what I mean? I think that you have to feel like, actually, this has never been written before. Nobody has, you know what I mean? And also that it needs to be done. And don't you think, I mean, I don't know about you, but I mean, those kinds of feelings definitely help me kind of overcome my very natural trepidation, and I will say well-founded trepidation. If you have a child that sort of says like, God, maybe I shouldn't try that backflip. You think, yes, maybe, yeah, exactly. That little voice that says, maybe I shouldn't try it, it's telling you something very sensible. But as a writer, we have to overcome those voices. And so I don't know you, but for me, there's some sense that, yes, there is something that I can say, that I need to say, that hasn't been said, and then somehow that enables you to kind of face down the demons, right? Because it's kind of like, it may be that you know nothing about this, but you do know that there's something you want to say. And I don't know, do you think that's true of you as well?
I think that's more true in fiction.
Interesting.
Perhaps, which I have also written, would like to go back to someday, but we touched on this in our conversation. You do get niched. I don't know if that's actually a verb, to niche, but writers get niched. And, there's not another great baseball player that I want to write about. What'd you say?
Shouldn't we say niched?
No, I like niched. Niched is baseball. And, so it's very hard for a sports writer to step out of that. And people say, oh, she's just a sports writer. And that plays into that she can't tell 20th century American history. What I find is that there usually is one moment, one interview, one archival discovery that makes me brave. And once I find it, then I can proceed. So in the case of Sandy Koufax, it was when his high school buddy, Fred Wilpon, owner of the beleaguered Mets, said to me, he's not an observant Jew, but he's a really serious cultural Jew. And he told me about his grandfather, who basically raised him, who was a socialist and who was an electrician, and he showed up at the big plant in Manhattan on the east side, and the gates started to close after the shift went in. He said, that's not why I came to America. And he walked away. This explains Sandy Koufax to me enormously. Mantle passing out dead drunk in my lap at 3:00 in the morning in the bar where my mother lost her virginity in 1941. That was helpful. That was helpful. And in Babe's case up in Cooperstown, I found an interview that had been published in Sport magazine by a young boy had won a contest that he could go visit Babe Ruth in the Yankee locker room in 1934 when Babe was falling apart and falling down. And it makes sense, given who Babe Ruth was, that he would be more authentic. What I find is I have to hear an authentic voice. And where are you going to get an authentic voice for somebody who's been dead for this long and who had a ghostwriter for everything he ever said? So this kid, this 14-year-old high school newspaper boy, was able to get Babe Ruth to say something in his own voice. And once I heard that, I thought, okay, I can do that.
Well, that is interesting because that is different than fiction, where I guess what I'm really trying to say at some level is I'm looking for my own voice. That's when I hear my own voice.
Yes.
That I know that I have whatever it is to go on. And so it's, that's kind of, it's an interesting thing. And let me ask you too, as far as were there, as you tried to find the nerve to write about history when you weren't a historian, as and you've told me that it actually made you kind of physically sick to think about it,
Yes,
I mean, that really, the jitters were very real. But, it's like, I'm not sure, but, it's almost as if, in my case, that my own characters, and of course, some of the reading that I'd done kind of enabled me, because my own heroine, Gwen, was so brave. And Eleanor, my lawyer, was so brave. And then the people I was reading about, the kind of the women pitchers, and we're talking about, yes, baseball's the American game, and very significantly, of course, women are not on the field, and as I was reading about, Isla Jane Waters and Borders and, maybe Peanut Johnson and Jackie Mitchell and Monet Davis, and, and it's like, I'm reading about these guys. And like I say, my own characters, because I found that they gave me the courage to do what I was doing. Do you know what I mean? I mean, like my own imaginary world and the people that I was that I was thinking about heartened me. And people always ask, well, do you have a mentor that you would go to? At this point, I don't have somebody to go and hold my hand. You know what I mean? I mean, you're not going to go and ask, I'm so nervous about my book. Could you give me a pep talk? We can't do that anymore, right? I mean,
You're talking to me?
What?
You talking to me?
Yeah, I mean, I'm saying. I mean, exactly. We're like, we can't. No one is going to hold your hand, right? No one's going to hold your hand. They just want to tell me when it's done. And
but
so
there is always a moment for me. And I mean, in Squeeze Play, which is the novel I wrote, which certainly was inspired by my life as a sports writer for the Washington Post at a time when that was brand new and women weren't accustomed.
Talk about something that you really needed a lot of balls to do. I mean, that was really, it's really quite amazing. I mean, in that way also, by the way, Jane, we're very parallel that way, in that you broke into sports writing. I broke into the novel at a time when Asian Americans did not write novels.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? I mean, that was just a given. Even when I was at the Bonding Institute at Radcliffe, and I said I was writing a novel, and all academics said to me, it's like, aren't you really writing immigrant autobiography? Because it was really understood that we produced, artifacts, not artifice, right? We were not artists, obviously. Obviously.
What I found in Squeeze Play is that the characters took over.
Kind of, there's a barrier, let me break it, right?
In Squeeze Play, the heroine, who started out as a sort of faux me, left me in the dirt. She decided what was going to happen. It wasn't up to me anymore. And that, that was motivating because she was in charge. Her name is A.B. Berkowitz, by the way. And there was an A.B. Berkowitz in my high school class. But in nonfiction, there's some touchstone. And the interview with this boy, whose son I found, by the way, he asked Babe Ruth the one question no adult ever asked him. What does it feel like to be in the batter's box? I mean, it's such a kid would ask that question. And so he got a real not canned answer. Do you want me to tell you what he said?
Of course.
Okay, I'll tell you what he said. Well, you're all alone out there, the Babe said. You're expected to belt it. You don't want to let anybody down, but I don't worry about how I'm going to hit. I don't bother trying to outguess the field. I think about the pork chops I had the night before, and if there should have been more salt in the barbecue sauce. He didn't have to think too far in the batter's box about all the disappointments, about his parents' marriage, about the punishments at St. Mary's. But the second the pitcher rears back, everything goes out of my mind but the ball, he told the boy, John Robbins. What I see is the heart of it, and that's what I lean into.
Wow.
And
Quote.
that became the heart of the book.
Yeah.
Once I heard his voice. So in your case, you need to hear the voice of your characters. You know, they tell you what to do.
Yeah.
Florida.
Yeah.
Florida.
And it's good because, you know, you hear the characters, their passions, you know, you're kind of writing on behalf of them. As you know, you're writing, it's your voice, but you're writing on behalf of them. And, you know, you're writing, in my case, you know, I'm also very aware that, you know, like the same way you entered the locker room, there you are, a woman. I'm very aware that I am a woman novelist and this is not girl territory. Do you know what I mean? I am very aware that, you know, so this is the, you know what I mean? So everybody from Updike to Malamud to Roth, you know, to Don DeLillo, you know, I get it, you know, that they have staked this out and that women are not supposed to be there. I mean, I'm aware, as you know, some poets have ventured into this, women poets, you know, have ventured into this territory. You know, Marianne Moore, you know, as you know. And our dear friend Gail Mazer, who wrote that wonderful poem, "Baseball is."
I think it's the best. I think it's the best baseball poem.
It is. It's called "Baseball is Not a Metaphor." We recommend it to all. Although Marianne Moore was pretty good too. You know, I love it that she wrote, you know, assign Yogi Berra to Ed Canaveral. You know, he can handle any missile.
Yeah.
Baseball is like writing. She said you can never tell with either, you know, kind of how it will go or what you will do. You know, she was good too, but not as good as Gail. You know, Gail's poem is the best. I should explain to those of you in the audience, we're talking about poet Gail Mazer, who was a mutual friend. But in any case, but you know, you've written squeeze play, you know, but in a general kind of way, you know, when it comes to literary novel, you know, and this, it's sort of a metaphor for America, where on one hand, baseball is the American game, on the other, and coincidentally, the baseball novel is men's territory, and I, as a writer, am very aware of that, Ginny. I'm very aware that I'm claiming it, you know, as a woman's territory. Of course, you know, like all territory, you know, it's great literary territory. It's great literary territory because just dramatically, it's so strong, you know, beginning, middle, end, right? Writers love it because, you know, baseball is autotelic, like writing, right? It doesn't have a point. It is its own point, just like art. So this business of their having picked this, you know, this very, very, very fertile, wonderful, you know, territory. This wonderful game that it has built into it that home away home structure that we see like in so many children's novels, right? It's built into the game. So this is like the best literary territory ever, right? And then from an American point of view, you know, Mike Huber was asking himself, you know, is that perfect balance between the urban and the pastoral, between the individual and the team, right? It embodies all those American ideals about the American, you know, even playing field, blah, 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 as I have written in my book, as you know. It's, you know, from the time of Walt Whitman, it's been claimed as having the snap, go, fling of the American atmosphere. And lo and behold,
here come the girls.
It's boy territory, you know. And especially when we claim it, you know, in all its Americanness, we're very aware that this is not only not as a boy territory. I will say that it is not seen as territory for Asian American women novelists. And so just like you with that locker room, of course, I think that this is something we have in common, Jane, that, you know, no sooner do we see that do not enter sign and something in us says, excuse me, or doesn't say, excuse me, that just sort of says, here I am.
I always had to stop at the threshold of the locker room and take a deep breath and go, here I go again. And the interesting thing about it, and I did write this, is that nakedness is a metaphor. The reason they don't want women in there doesn't really have to do with whether you do or you do not see their junk, to put it in the modern vernacular. It has to do with being seen for who they are. And in all their weakness when they fail, and in their triumphalism when they hit that, grand slam. And that's what they're afraid of. And there were a few guys every once in a while who understood that. And we're absolutely grateful for it, actually. And so, and they would talk to me as if I was, a sister. So I would get stories that guys wouldn't get because the guys always ask the same stupid questions. They were competing with them. They wanted to show them that they had a high school slider too. And they would say, well, what was wrong with that slider that, Mickey hit into the third deck? And the pitcher would look at them and say, you schmuck. It was a curveball, and women weren't competing with them. I wasn't trying to show them what I knew. I wanted to know what they knew and what they could tell me about it. And I think that's a vastly different when you're an outsider, as you are in your world, and I was. It is the ultimate benefit because you shouldn't be the insider.
No, you shouldn't be the insider. But the other thing is that, in the very fact that you are returning to them their humanity, and the fact that, we are in the locker room, we're writing about the big American sport, but in a new way. I think, it's also a critique of America. Do you know what I mean? It's like, what is the matter with the American dream as it is presently conceived? And that is that this, it's all about performance. It's all about those home runs. It's about, some kind of enterprise that can be captured in statistics. And I think that while we can all see that there's many things about this, which is American in a good way, there is also something about it which is very screwed up. And, you've written about that by talking about the celebrity culture. And of course, you and others have talked very much about sports as, as a business. And it's, and the very close connection between baseball and capitalism. And I think that when we women enter this arena, and then you bring out the humanity of the players, and I bring out, what I mean, kind of what about these women pitchers, and a whole different way of looking at it. So like mine's, there's a way in which my book is a dystopia, but it's also a utopia. Because in my, in the middle of my dystopia is this baseball utopia, in which women get to play. And, so there's a way in which, we're both claiming this territory, but, as soon as we have a seat at the table, we are changing the menu, right? And not to switch metaphors here. But, but there is a way in which, we enter, and as soon as we are there, we begin to critique. And which we're critiquing, of course, is the American dream, and these heroes, and what does it mean to have, to have these figures, and what is the truth? And the truth of the matter is, of course, we want baseball to bring out the very best in us. I mean, that's what it's all about. It's about virtue. It's about it's about the level playing field in which we can all show what we're really made of. And what do we want to discover? Well, we want to discover that we're really all just like Sandy Koufax. except that, unfortunately, what we actually discover is that, there's a lot of cheating and not everybody is, but there's a way in which we still want, these guys to be heroes, and we're still thrilled, by the way, of course, when we see this arena inhabited by real heroes, we're thrilled, like we see Dr. Fauci out there throwing out that first pitch in the first game of this, of the season this year, and we're thrilled. And we don't care that his pitch was just like so far from home base, right?
He hurt his arm practicing.
What?
He hurt his arm practicing.
He doesn't have time to practice. That man is way too
he actually went out and had a catch for the first time in, centuries with his son, and he hurt his arm. And, God bless him, right?
God love him. I love all the jokes. Like he wanted to make sure that, nobody would catch anything.
Nobody would catch anything from him, right?
But my point is, we still see it as a Reno, that we want to see virtue. We want to see virtue. So when we watch the games, we see both the great American ideal and we see the great American reality, like right up, butting up, and of course, that's why we're fascinated as narrative people. We're fascinated.
One of the things I love about your book, and particularly the beginning where you're describing, and maybe you want to read it, how this young girl just grows up with this amazing ability to heave things. And it's a gesture of childhood that we all have, but certain people just have it more, right? And Gwen, the heroine, has it more. And what's happened in terms of writing about sports in this crazy stat world where everything is reduced to a number is that it's not just that it's male driven because everything's about a number and measuring yourself against a number or against somebody else's numbers, but now they've created a zillion more numbers to measure themselves by. And what gets lost is the beauty of the gesture, of the incredible effort that a doctor once described to me as neuromuscular genius. How do they do these things? I grew up running after making a catch, but I couldn't have saved Don Larson's, perfect game for him the way Mickey Mantle did on two bad knees. So that's the part that I love writing about, and that's become less and less of the conversation.
Yeah, this is probably why you did like my book. I will read the part about baseball, since we are talking about baseball, America, and this spark, this thing that the very human spark that you and I agree is actually at the heart of baseball.
I'm going to put on my glove while you do it, okay?
So you can get the ball. So this is a section which, Gwen is talking about, Gwen, my heroine, who is this young female baseball prodigy, has grown up. She's getting ready to pitch in the Olympics against the Chinese Russian team. That's a Chinese Russian team. They've all been genetically modified, which is terrifying to her teammates, and partly because it means that they're all switch hitters, which of course is the first thing that you would do if you were genetically modifying a baseball team. But anyway, let me just read this, and her teammates are terrified. And she says, perhaps all this was fear, pure and simple, on the part of Gwen's teammates. But feeding their obsession, of course, was the sense that baseball was more than a sport, that it was a crown jewel. There were people who said it wasn't even invented in America. There were people who pointed out it was mentioned by Jane Austen long before it was ever mentioned here. But if baseball took on a hallowed meaning, it took on that meaning in our American dreams. For was this not the level playing field we envisioned? The field on which people could show what they were made of? And didn't we Americans believe above all that everyone should have a real chance at that? Didn't we believe that with the good of the team at heart, something in us might just hit a ball off our shoe tops? A metaphor I got from stating from Jane Levy, by the way, and send it clear out of the park? If Gwen's teammates were playing Chine Musha for something, I thought, it was for this, for a chance to show, my mother would have said, that even if we all returned to the dirt and the wind and the rain, like the plants and the animals, we had a bigness in us, something beyond algorithms and beyond upgrades, something we were proud to call human, or so it seemed to me. So this, Jane, is where we are exactly on the same wavelength. I think finally we think about baseball as about this kernel, this special thing, this special ability, this special genius, this neuromuscular genius, something in us, some kind of bigness that we think is finally what the American dream should be about and what America should be about, but lo and behold, is not about exactly.
No.
Very sadly.
May I add one thing that I think complements what you said?
Of course.
because this is the part of my book that actually matters to me the most, and nobody noticed it. So,
Please say.
for an architect, space is liberty, a gift to the imagination seeking to impose form and function in unprecedented fashion. For an athlete, whose success is contingent upon the ability to replicate that form, that affords maximum function. Space is an invitation to deviation, which is an invitation to disaster, to the yips, to messed up mechanics and lost release points, to offers and golden sombreros, to sophomore slumps that last a lifetime. So, and the greatest athletes are nonconformists, like Babe Ruth, inventors who think outside the box with their bodies.
That's so beautiful. So beautiful.
You noticed it. I know you noticed it.
Of course. And, you know, it's the outside of the boxness, you know, that's so American. You know what I mean? It's just like, you know.
That's so us.
And from the beginning, it was, you know, the inside the boxness, those were the Brits, right? And the essence of what it meant to be American was to be outside of the box, and outside of the box to be true to this thing. You know, on that note, we probably should be wrapping up. Jane Lefty, if you want to say one thing more about kind of, you know, risk-taking that you might be taking, risks that you might be taking right now, if you want to talk about it, which you do not have to.
Well, thanks to COVID, the baseball books that I could have written next projects went out the window, which I suspect the new season will by the time anybody listens to this. It was just madness to try to play this way. And I thought, you know, baseball could have taken a moral stance, a higher plane. They could have said, you know what, we care too much about our fans not to play without them, and too much about our players to make them play in this. But no, of course not. Anyway, so that killed my baseball books. So I'm now fiddling around with talk about an outside the box story, a story about a Jewish girl in a convent. And that would be me.
It's going to be your most wonderful book yet.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And I think with that,
you have to say, no, you wrap it up. You say something.
Well, you have to ask me a question, Jane.
All right, Gish, I know you don't want to talk about what you're working on. So you've already told me that. How do you experience the fear of writing?
You know, it's funny, but I think I you know, it is this kind of, I don't know. I think it's kind of this disappearing into my characters. I mean, in other words, if I allow myself to look up, I mean, this has been true from the beginning. You know, I wrote the book Mona in the Promised Land about a Chinese girl turning Jewish, you know, in the middle of height of multiculturalism. It was like, you know, or what about my first book I wrote about, you know, I call my book Typical American, and it's an American story, you know. I started that book in what, 1983, I'm going to say, or something, no, 1986. And, you know, a story about Asian American immigrants that's been called Typical American and starts this American story. I mean, that was not done, you know? And I think that
okay, I'm going to be the hard-ass journalist. Disappearing into your characters is a way to lose fear.
Exactly.
Not how you experience fear.
I don't allow myself to do that.
Okay.
I mean, I really don't. So if I thought about it, well, I will say, you know, I mean, so yeah, I mean, I experience fear. I mean, so I have done things like, you know, I've ripped up notes from academics, for example, you know, kind of, or you know, I avoid reading their paper. I avoid their scrutiny. You know, I duck. I just don't want to, you know, I don't want to be reminded of them. So clearly I am afraid of them, or I'm afraid of their voices. I can hear their voices a little, exactly, just like you. Who are you to X, right?
What are you doing in this locker room?
Who are you to redefine the American dream, right? Who are you? Who do you think
Right.
you are? I hear those voices, and but I can't say that. I know that you talked about, you know, physically clutching. I don't have that. I simply, so far as I can tell, I mean, clearly I have the fear, but clearly, or so far as I am aware, I only have the defense. And the defense is to write and write and write, and
Right.
and to spend and really not to write so kind of obsessively that I do not have the time and energy to hear the possible criticism. I wrote Mona in the Promised Land. I was a new mother. And I remember talking to somebody at the time. I was just saying how difficult it was to be a writer. She said, sometimes we we do our best work when our backs are up against the wall. And it wasn't until later that I just realized, oh, it was an incredible gift that I was so busy I barely had time to shower. And what that meant was there was only one thing I could do, was sit down at my desk, have my double cappuccino, and start typing. And that was a great thing for me in the sense that it enabled me to take a risk that had I had more time, I would probably not be able to take. Exactly because I was under so much duress that I had to do it. So there it is. I think our time is up.
Answered the question.
What?
You answered the question.
Oh, good.
That's my job. That's my job.
Okay. Well, I think, Jane, as predicted, it's been really tough having this conversation with you.
Play ball.
I knew it would be a struggle. I think we told the audience, I don't know, it's going to be pulling teeth.
No, you don't need to ask us any questions. Don't prime us. We'll just go.
So I think at this point that we have to say goodbye to our audience and say, I think it's our half an hour. We may run over a little bit, but not too much. And thank you to the New York State Writers Institute and to everybody who made this happen.
And thank you to Gish for inviting me to join you.
Oh my God, Jane.
I really appreciate it.
I knew there was somebody out there who that would make this actually fun. Anyway, with all that, adieu.
Adieu.
This book festival is made possible with the support of the McGuire Family Endowment at the Writers Institute, the University at Albany Foundation, the Office of the President of UAlbany, the Peacock Family Foundation, the Capital District Library Council, Stuyvesant Plaza, Chet and Karen Opalka, Charles Toohey and Alice Green, Pernilla Dake, Elizabeth Ruthman, and Betsy Lopez. If you appreciate our programming and would like to support the Writers Institute, you can find out how at nyswritersinstitute.org.